But it is absurd that Republicans could not hold the man who's responsible for the very situation for which Eugene Goodman had to rise to the occasion. They could not hold Donald Trump accountable. So it's all a dog and pony show, in my best estimation. And it's all just one big kabuki theater, a game. And we have to understand it as such. Joining me now is John Nichols. He writes about politics for The Nation as its national affairs correspondent. He is a contributing writer to The Progressive and In These Times, and the associate editor of The Capital Times, the daily newspaper in Madison, Wisconsin. John is also the author of many books, including his latest from March 2020, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, The Enduring Legacy of Henry Wallace's Anti-Fascist, Anti-Racist Politics. John, thank you so much for joining me.
Ben, it is an honor to be with you.
It's always a pleasure. There's a lot to cover, but I've been reading your articles over the weekend and your tweets with regard to this situation. Tell me, what is your first reaction to the 43 Republicans who could not bring themselves to convict Donald Trump?
They betrayed their oaths of office. They swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution and to bear true faith to that commitment. They didn't do it. Look, they put partisanship ahead of the basic premises of the American experiment. And the basic premise is that we have elections. Those elections define our leaders. We have a peaceful transition of power. Donald Trump sought to avert that. Members of his own party said, that's fine. And no matter what Mitch McConnell says, no matter what any of these other people may try to say to explain it away or to apologize for themselves, their vote is all that matters. And I'll give you one final note here, just that I think is important. This isn't just about Trump. And this isn't even just about the 43 senators. This is about the fact that elites in this country with immense political and economic power have been told that they can operate with impunity, that they can do as they choose, because even at the highest level, where there should be the deepest responsibility, there will be those who block accountability. That's what happened in the Senate on Saturday.
You wrote in your piece the following. You said, by abandoning the calling of witnesses, Democrats and Republicans abandoned their responsibility to use every tool that was available to them to check and balance the imperial presidency. In the immediate trial of Donald Trump for incitement of insurrection and in the broader battle to renew the role of the Congress as a preeminent branch in a system of shared powers. There's a couple of key phrases in there that I think we should dig into, because this does not bode well for the future. I think one of the things we can all agree on is that if we survived Donald Trump, it's only because he was quite the bit feckless, but he has stress tested America and actually given a more efficient fascistic dictator the model of how they can use the imperial presidency to dominate Congress in a system that requires equal power in terms of checks and balances. Would you speak to that looming threat that is real as a result of not holding Donald Trump accountable?
You spoke to that very well yourself, my friend. That is exactly where the crisis is. And that is exactly why impeachment matters. Impeachment was developed by imperfect men more than the better part of 250 years ago. Look, the founding of this country was flawed in so many ways. But the interesting thing about those flawed men was that they did recognize that there would be situations in the future where dangerous people would come to power, and those dangerous people would seek to perpetuate their power by interrupting the election process, peaceful transfer of power, et cetera. And they would thus lock themselves in politically, becoming not presidents, but for all intents and purposes, monarchs. That was what was feared. That's what Donald Trump tried to do. Donald Trump is a buffoon. Donald Trump is a showman, a reality TV star who bumbled into the presidency because the Republican Party's leadership is so unappealing and so unpopular that he could push them aside and become their candidate. And also because he amplified many of what were previously their subtle appeals to racism, xenophobia, hatred. And so Donald Trump got there. He got into this position and he tried to hang on to it. he was narrowly prevented from doing it. This wasn't a big success for our system. It was a narrow aversion of crisis. And not holding him to account says to the next person down the line, hey, if you do this a little more gracefully, if you do this a little more carefully, you might get away with it. This isn't going to stop what we saw with Donald Trump. It's going to encourage others to think about how they might do it better. And I will tell you that there are people in the room who voted not to convict Donald Trump who are thinking they might be the next president of the United States. People like Josh Hawley, who's already running, there's no doubt of that. People like Ted Cruz, who's already running, there's no doubt of that. And it's important to understand that these people are as guilty as Donald Trump, of high crimes and misdemeanors against the republic.
Absolutely. I want to read directly from a quote you said of Ben Sass, Republican from Nebraska. In one of your articles, you said conservatives regularly denounce the executive overreach, but we ought primarily to denounce legislative impotence. If Congress cannot forcefully respond to an intimidation attack on Article 1 instigated by the head of Article 2, our constitutional balance will be permanently tilted. A weak and timid Congress will increasingly submit to an emboldened and empowered presidency. That's unacceptable. This institution needs to respect itself enough to tell the executive that some lines cannot be crossed. So here's my first question in that regard. Why then? Why is there anything here politically feasible for the current Republican Party? Let's set aside the ambition of Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton. They want to run for president, but by not holding Donald Trump accountable, they have left the Republican Party vulnerable to Donald Trump. So how do they think that they're going to be able to balance the madness of Donald Trump with their own political ambitions as a party?
That is a really critical question. You went right to the heart of the matter there, because Donald Trump may be our best protection against these other players. And Trump, as we've said, is buffoonish. He is easily identified as the crisis in waiting that he is. And I think Jamie Raskin, by the way, did that incredibly well in some of his closing statements. But these other more capable players, these other more strategic figures have to get around Donald Trump to get to the leadership of the party. And I will suggest to you that Donald Trump is incapable of letting go of power. And so that was the reason why impeachment, trial, conviction were necessary, because those could lead to a decision based on the Constitution that he cannot seek office in the future. Because that didn't happen, I'm quite sure he will. I'd be rather shocked if he doesn't try to come back in 2024. And so then the fight will not be between a Josh Hawley and a Donald Trump. It will be between some figure in the Republican Party who wants to stand up to him and Trump himself. That sets up a hell of a fight. And as a political writer, I'm thrilled to cover it. But it, as Sass suggests, it doesn't get to the heart of the matter. And the heart of the matter is that we have an imperial presidency in the United States. If you've got a great person in there, it can be used well. If you've got a bad player in there, it can be used in incredibly destructive ways. And I want to emphasize that it can be used to promote racism, xenophobia, hatred, division for political purposes. And that is really the essence of fascism.
Right. And that's what's so disheartening in this moment is the fact that we see the problem. Right. And if you would speak to this, we know exactly how America will be overthrown from within by an imperial presidency when you have complacent and complicit Republicans of either party. Right. The structure that we have now, I often put it in context of COVID-19. Can any of us imagine if COVID-19 had struck in the first year of Donald Trump's presidency? By now, we would probably be close to 2 million deaths because of that type of presidency and unchecked power and our inability to hold them accountable in real time. So my question for you is, What does this country need to do to protect itself from an imperial presidency when Congress is either unwilling or unable to hold them accountable?
Look, the fact of the matter is we need constitutional reform. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because that's a tall hill to climb, and I don't want to be unrealistic. I'll talk about a couple other elements here as well. But constitutional reform is necessary. We need to understand the insanity of the Electoral College and also the insanity of having a Senate where a small number of members can block accountability for someone like Donald Trump. It's important to recognize that of the 43 senators who voted not to hold Donald Trump to account represent 38% of the American people, 38% of our population. The 57 senators who voted to hold him to account represent, I'm sorry, I gotta make sure I got it right. They represent 38% of the population. The others represent 62% of the population. So we have 62% of America's representatives voted to hold Trump to account, voted to deal with this issue. They were blocked by 38%. And this happens again and again and again in the United States Senate. We have to really think about the reality of the Senate. And that's something that most people don't talk about, but it's the heart of the crisis. Then let us talk about something else that's much quicker. We can begin to address some of this dysfunction by having Democrats, I'm not talking about Republicans here, I'm having Democrats act in a responsible way as regards expanding democracy in this country. There are pieces of legislation they can pass, but there's something big they can do, and that is go to the mat to make the District of Columbia a state. DC's statehood is central to moving forward. It doesn't just add 2 senators and an elected member of Congress. It puts the basic premises of democracy forward in the way that they should be. And we should also recognize that Delegate Stacey Plaskett, who was such a brilliant part of the impeachment team there, she can't vote for president.
Right.
She's from the Virgin Islands. They don't allow the people in the Virgin Islands to participate in presidential elections. They don't allow them to send voting representatives to Congress. Whether we're talking about statehood for the Virgin Islands or some other model that provides representation, there's got to be representation. We've got roughly 8 million people in America who are U.S. citizens but can't vote for president. That's absurd. They also can't have representation in the House and Senate. So we have a basic democracy problem, and that's something that Democrats ought to be focused on.
I mean, it's the most essential democratic problem as Americans is taxation without representation. But I digress. I want to ask you this question. What advice would you give to Joe Biden, his administration, Democrats in general, liberals, progressives? What would you say to the opposition to the Republican Party in general in terms of how we proceed, specifically in terms of this bipartisanship fetish, for lack of a better word, that so many Democrats have? What would you tell them when we see how far Republicans are willing to go in order to maintain power?
Ben, how old are you?
Oh, no, I'm 40.
You're 40 years old.
I feel older every day.
I know, but you're young. And bipartisanship, before you were born, it had meaning. It did. The fact of the matter is the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, those were passed with very significant Republican support. In the 1960s, even into the early 1970s, Republicans were in the forefront often of supporting environmental protection. There were Republicans who had, 100% or very nearly 100% AFL-CIO pro-labor records. And so Republicans and Democrats competed with one another to be right about things. In that case, bipartisanship can be great. You can really build a coalition. You can cut out the Southern segregationists and bring in the New York Republicans, right? And build a coalition there with liberal Democrats that actually works. But that's ancient history. The fact of the matter is, in the modern era, bipartisanship has become the watchword for not getting important things done. And this is really the vital thing to understand. Barack Obama, who was a good man with good intentions, sought to have a bipartisan presidency. He wasted months, even years, trying to get a few Republicans to come across and work with him. It didn't work. And I don't put that on Obama. You got to have a president who tries, right? And I respect that he made the effort. But the fact of the matter is, we got proof out of that presidency. Joe Biden isn't going to get any more favors than Barack Obama got. And so what Biden and the Democrats have to recognize is, or they basically have to learn from experience. And that lesson ought to teach them that in this case, it is totally appropriate to pass a COVID bill with 51 votes, 50 Democrats and Kamala Harris. It is perfectly appropriate to move on DC statehood in the way that has been proposed and other models, to do everything you can to make the changes that are necessary. And I'll say one final thing, Ben, if I can, and that is, look, I'm a true believer in impeachment. I love impeachment. I think it's a wonderful tool of accountability. But the fact of the matter is it's had the teeth taken out of it by partisanship. And one of the things that I, to be honest, I wish they had impeached Trump for COVID, for his handling of COVID. I wish they'd put that issue on the table and said, you got 500,000 people dead or almost. That's what you need to be held to account for. And why I bring that up is to say that I think Democrats have to take the real issues of hurt in America, the real pain of people, this pandemic, mass unemployment, all the other challenges that people are facing, and they need to put them front and center. They need to hold Trump and his allies to account, and anybody going forward to account for letting people die, right? And so take it beyond just the baseline constitutional questions, which I totally respect, and go to that deeper question of, are there people in power who will let you die for reasons of politics? That's the kind of discussion, that's the kind of politics we have to put forward.
That's that's the real question. And that's the real painful question when we dig underneath that and ask ourselves, how is it that 500,000 people can die in this country and no one is held accountable for it? I think it speaks to a much deeper problem here in the United States. But maybe we'll have that conversation on another day. John Nichols of The Nation, your most recent book is a great one, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party. The enduring legacy of Henry Wallace's anti-fascist, anti-racist politics. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm really honored to be with you. Thanks for having me.